Getting an appointment with the head of the city traffic police department turned out to be not such an easy task. He accepted for personal matters once a week, on Monday, and for only 2 hours, just at the time when Maxim was at work. He could not get through to the accident analysis group or the inquiry body, where they were dealing with incidents with serious consequences. Either they gave the wrong numbers at the duty station, or all the employees were so intensely busy searching for the perpetrators of road accidents that no one answered the phone. The only place other than the duty station that could be reached was the chief's office. A young secretary with an unexpectedly pleasant voice first of all asked what question Maxim Sergeyevich was on. That's how Max introduced himself. He wants to meet with the first head. After all, many questions can be solved by his deputies, and she is even ready to dictate their phone numbers. It is only necessary to determine the essence of the issue. Perhaps she was right, but judging by the girl's voice, Maxim did not want to tell her about the accident where his Alyosha was injured, who is still in a coma, and there is no end in sight. Moreover, no one from the body of inquiry had deigned to contact him over the past 5 days, which was why the overwhelming melancholy of the first days gradually turned into elementary anger. Well, he would tell her, turning his soul over once more, because she would send it to the body of inquiry anyway, and it was impossible to reach them. What? Has the circle closed? His little Alyosha, from whom Lena has not left all 5 days, is balancing somewhere on the edge, and this freak, who knocked him down at a pedestrian crossing in broad daylight and calmly disappeared, is now driving around the city and covering his tracks. And it seems that either no one is looking for him or just doesn't want to do it. The center of a large neighborhood, surrounded by surveillance cameras. What else is needed? Right at the corner of the intersection where it happened, there is a branch of a large commercial bank, where there are cameras, and a little further on there is a private clinic, where there are probably guards and the same video cameras. And further down the street, if you look closely, you can find these cameras. You would like to. And it looked like the cops didn't have one. That's why Maxim decided to contact his boss right away. And when asked by the secretary, who was clearly protecting the peace of his boss, he muttered something like, "On the issue of road safety." Well, what other questions can I ask the traffic police? It's not about paying utility bills, is it? The girl with the pleasant voice did not like his answer, and incomprehensible persistence. She rustled papers for a long time, which could be clearly heard in the handset of the phone, muttered something, not forgetting at the same time to demonstrate not only vigorous activity, but also good manners, periodically urging to wait just one more second. Finally, she answered, "I can only schedule you for October 2nd at 11:30. Are you satisfied?" Max was taken aback. Being in the dark for 2 more weeks? 2 weeks, when maybe the bill goes by the minute? Yes. In 2 weeks you can repair the car and sell it by proxy, and no one will stop you from going somewhere far away. Especially the police. No thanks, Max muttered, and hung up. He decided to come to the boss without an appointment and an invitation. He had the opportunity to do this. Nikolai Sergeyevich Nezhnov, the head of the city traffic police department, was both angry and confused at the same time. It was necessary to get there like that, literally between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the mayor with his problems and requests, on the other, the city prosecutor, and also with his directly opposite requests. True, these requests are not specific, skillfully veiled, at least on the part of the mayor, but this does not make it any easier. The prosecutor, that straight guy, just asked how the investigation was going, and mentioned that the mother of the child injured in an accident at the intersection was his employee, and not just, but one of the best. I didn't ask for anything special, neither to personally participate nor to help, nor to speed up. It was self-evident that a smart person would understand, and Nikolai Sergeyevich considered himself smart. Otherwise, it is unlikely that by the age of 45 he would have risen to the rank of colonel, and even headed the city department. The mayor called on Saturday morning, which in itself was strange. It was a day off after all. Moreover, the call was on a mobile phone, which the colonel could not understand in any way. How did the head get his number? They did not seem to exchange. Then he waved his hand. He knows and knows, that's why he's the mayor, to know everything. They weren't close, they didn't drink vodka together, they didn't steam in the same bath, but they knew each other, and they had to meet. For the most part, either at meetings and reports at the mayor's office, or at some kind of solemn events, usually ending with a banquet. but there were no intimate conversations between them personally either. And then the bell rang. "Nikolai Sergeyevich? Good afternoon." Karpov is worried. Then there were non-binding clarifications about business, health, and weekend plans. Nezhnov sinfully wondered if the mayor was going to invite him somewhere to nature on the weekend, to some kind of hunting trip. According to rumors, he was an avid hunter, and the hunting season was just open. The head of the Department of Internal Affairs, who once happened to visit the mayor, told in a private conversation that in the hallway of a country house on the wall hangs a huge moose head with the same huge shovel-shaped horns, branched at the edges, extracted personally by the mayor. But everything turned out to be much more prosaic. "Nikolai Sergeyevich, I've come to you actually, on business. This is not an ordinary case," the mayor hesitantly explained, although what is unusual there? He stated more firmly, "My son's car was stolen. That's where the traffic police chief got suspicious. He didn't like something about this situation, but so far he hadn't seen anything particularly reprehensible and couldn't figure out what was wrong. That the mayor is calling him about the theft, and not to the duty station, is understandable, although his son, as the owner of the car, will still have to write a statement. The danger bell, if it rang somewhere on the periphery, was very far away and very quiet. The colonel had a hunch, though. My son is studying in Novosibirsk," Karpov continued. "I only studied for 2 weeks and came back for the weekend on Thursday. I forgot something. Gape." He decided to build up. "Well, here are the friends, as without them. We decided to take a steam bath in our house outside the city. Yes, it looks like they weren't just steaming, you idiots. They wake up in the morning and there is no car in the yard. No one saw or heard anything. That's the way it is, Nikolai Sergeyevich," he finished very pessimistically. I had to say something. "Viktor Alexeyevich, we'll find your car," the colonel began, too optimistically, as it seemed to him. "Don't worry. I'll call the duty station now, give you a task, and the mechanism will spin. All my son needs to do is come to us, write a statement, and tell us everything in detail." He intended to explain in detail to the mayor everything that needs to be done, and what he personally, the head of the traffic police department, would do to find the missing person as quickly as possible, secretly hoping for some preferences in the future. But Karpov interrupted him without much ceremony. "Here's the deal, Nikolai Sergeyevich. The boys can't say for sure when the car was stolen. Maybe this morning, maybe at night, or maybe yesterday afternoon. They went there on Friday morning, steamed up in the bath, devils. They say they didn't go out into the yard." Here the mayor took a short pause, but Nezhnov already understood what he was going to talk about next, and although he did not like it very much, he did not dare to stop the mayor, and who would risk it? "Nikolai Sergeyevich, my son will arrive in an hour. I'll send my driver for him now. The asshole doesn't have anything to ride now. You will take his statement about the theft yesterday, otherwise you never know what. They will cause trouble on his car, and you will not prove anything later. As it is, he's a good boy," the frustrated father finished on an optimistic note. But even on the phone, his tension could be felt waiting for an answer. The head of the traffic police department had no choice but to promise to fulfill all the voiced requests of the chief, although the bells of impending problems were now thundering loudly. The colonel knew the son of the mayor, Denis Karpov. Not personally, of course, but I knew. He first heard about it about 2 years ago at the usual morning report, where the crews on duty reported on the work and identified violators over the past day. By chance, I caught on to the surname Karpov, listened to it, and so I got acquainted in absentia with one of the most notorious violators in the future. Having stopped a black Audi A7 Sportback with 3 sevens on the number that exceeded the speed limit by 40 kilometers in the middle of the city, the inspector was incredibly surprised that such a powerful, practically racing car capable of reaching speeds of up to 250 kilometers was driven by a boy who, according to the documents, turned 18 2 weeks ago. A thorough check confirmed that the owner of this luxury foreign car is indeed this young man, who looks more like yesterday's 10th grader. This former schoolboy came to the attention of traffic police 5 or 6 more times in 2 years, and all for speeding. For the sake of truth, it is worth saying that he always paid the fines for his transgressions, and almost on time. He had no debts. Only a little later, it became known that this respectable violator, who pays fines on time, if the violator can be called respectable, is the son of the mayor. And this wonderful car was given by a loving father to his child on his 18th birthday, and on the occasion of the graduation of the first year of the Novosibirsk Law Institute. It became clear where the first-year student got such a car, but even the head of the traffic police did not know where such a number came from. It is clear that one of his subordinates got his hands on it quite well, but he did not figure it out. This was already practiced everywhere. When the colonel found out how much such a car costs, the man himself is not poor, he thought for the first time that he had chosen the wrong profession for himself. Nikolai Sergeyevich Nezhnov could only wonder what this young fan of fast driving had finally done, since the all-powerful dad himself was calling him with a very unusual request. Reality has surpassed all the worst assumptions. Alyosha went to school for only 2 weeks. Maxim, with an uncharacteristic sentimentality and bitterness of recent events, recalled the enthusiastic impatience of his son, who was going to school on the 1st of September. He woke up, of course, before anyone else. My father realized this through the remnants of sleep by the soft tinkling, rustling, and repeated clicking of the zipper of the school backpack he bought a long time ago. No other way. The young first grader decided once again, or maybe more than once, to check if he had packed everything at school for the first lesson in his life. A knowledge lesson. Then Leshka couldn't think of anything else but to unceremoniously show up in his parents' bedroom with an inflated satchel, so that his parents would confirm his confidence. I had to get up. With the unhurried step of a first grader, it took about 15 minutes to reach the school located here in the neighborhood. However, there was one but, because of which I had to accompany the baby to school for the first 2 weeks, and meet him on the way from school. The path to knowledge was hampered by 2 streets that had to be crossed, preferably without incident. One of them was nothing. It was as small as the first grader himself, and there weren't many cars here. But the second one, which separated half of the neighborhood from the hospital campus, behind which there was a school, with its abundance of cars, served as a serious obstacle. Here, at a pedestrian crossing near the intersection, the traffic light was constantly flashing yellow, and, nevertheless, the crossing was not considered completely safe. From time to time, various kinds of excesses have occurred here, so far ending, thank God, favorably. It was in order to teach Alyosha how to cross the streets correctly and get to school safely that Maxim, who had about 5 minutes to walk to his job, saw him off every morning for 2 weeks, teaching him the tricky survival skills of a small person in a big city. Lessons at school started at 8:30, and Max had been working since 8, so for a couple of weeks he had to be a little late. But the head, having found out the reason, went to meet him and turned a blind eye to it. Alyosha was already met and escorted home by his grandmother, however, as well as other first graders, who were also more often met by grandmothers who loved their grandchildren. 2 weeks later, an experienced first grader took an exam on the rules of pedestrian traffic, after which it had to be decided whether he could go to school alone so that his dad would not be late for work, and from school so as not to disturb his grandmother. On Friday, Alyosha left the entrance completely on his own and went to school. He knew that his father was coming from behind, but they agreed that the son would not even look back until he reached the school gates. He got there normally, however. He still turned around a couple of times, looked for his father with his eyes, and walked on, reassured. He stopped in front of the pedestrian crossing, looked in both directions one at a time, made sure that there were no flying cars, and calmly crossed. Maxim breathed a sigh of relief, although he understood perfectly well that he could not, and should not, see his boyfriend off for the rest of his life. Maxim was not surprised to receive a phone call shortly after noon. He was surprised when he saw who was calling. My mother-in-law called. Personally, Valentina Ivanovna, Lena's mother, called him extremely rarely, and more often when she could not reach her daughter to resolve any issues with her, or just take an interest in business, although she treated her son-in-law quite kindly and respectfully. Maxim paid her the same, but still did not call her mom. He addressed her by her first name and patronymic. However, Lena addressed his parents in the same way. Other non-Demostroev times have come. At first, the voice that addressed him without a doubt seemed completely unfamiliar to Max. He was somehow lifeless, inanimate, as if it was being spoken by a man completely devoid of emotions, struggling to find words. the voice of a man resembling a rubber toy, from which the air was released. It was only when Maxim understood the meaning of what was said that he realized that it was really his mother-in-law who was calling. Maxim. A long pause. Lyoshenka got hit by a car. And again silence. Max tried to make sense of what he had heard, but he did not try to apply it to himself at all. On the contrary, his mind tried to abstract itself from it, because it simply could not be. But as he realized that it was not customary to joke about such things, and what Valentina Ivanovna said was true, Maxim himself began to resemble a deflated rubber doll. A colossal weakness, such as he had never experienced, rolled over like a giant wave, cutting off air access. He was forced to lean against the back of a chair, unable to take a breath or move. An instant feeling of nausea, noise in his head and dizziness knocked him out of the surrounding reality in an instant. An incomprehensible veil before his eyes blurred the outlines of objects, and he saw everything as if in a fog. If he could look at himself from the outside now, he probably wouldn't recognize himself. Instead of a young, handsome, confident guy, a small, crushed man was sitting on a chair, white as chalk. But after a minute he began to come to his senses. Is he alive? Max's voice had also changed beyond recognition. It was hoarse and rattling. Valentina Ivanovna tried to pull herself together. The ambulance took him to the Miners' Rehabilitation Center. He's unconscious. Traumatic brain injury. And a little quieter with difficulty. Severe. It was necessary to do something, and this realization that he, the man in the family, should take on his shoulders the whole burden of what had happened, forced him to struggle with his fear, which at first overwhelmed him until his knees trembled. How did it happen? His voice had stopped rattling, though the hoarseness hadn't completely disappeared. And where? Valentina Ivanovna, a little encouraged by the changes in her son-in-law's voice, began to speak quickly, almost without pauses, and her voice was already recognizable. On Sovetskaya Street, at a pedestrian crossing. I went to get Alyosha as usual, even a little early to keep an eye on him, as we agreed yesterday. I haven't reached the crossing yet, and I see he's already walking, so proud and independent. I don't know if they were released from school earlier, or if something else happened. And then he saw me, smiled, waved, and ran across the passage to meet me. Then she fell silent, again remembering with horror the picture she had seen, and her voice, filled with tears, dimmed again. The car is a passenger car. Black. I didn't even slow down. And I didn't stop. I just drove even faster. When Lyoshenka fell, he hit his head on the asphalt. That's all she could say. And Maxim heard that his mother-in-law was crying, and not just crying, but choking on tears, barely trying to stop. One more very important question remained unclear, and Max, breaking through the mumbled sounds, asked, Does Lena know? No, Maxim. I cannot. You call her yourself, please. Her voice became quiet and lifeless again. Where are you? Maxim tried to distract her with his question. I'm here, near the crossing. I'm waiting for traffic cops. That's what the ambulance said. They informed them, and then they went. They couldn't wait. Lena did not leave Alyosha's side all 5 days. She was sitting with her elbows on the edge of the bed, leaning over her child, who seemed to have become even smaller, constantly holding his hand and talking softly, completely oblivious to others. Her face was haggard, her features sharpened, and dark circles appeared under her eyes, more like bruises. It was impossible to recognize the old Elena in her with a cheerful, charming smile, confident, relaxed, and able to make independent decisions. All this seemed to fade into the background, but the first and only thing now was this baby, helpless and defenseless, lying in front of her. Her husband's timid attempts to replace her at least for the night so that she could rest properly and at least get enough sleep ran into an impenetrable wall of denial. She looked at Maxim with surprised eyes, as if amazed at his incomprehensibility, and quietly, as if afraid to wake up a sleeping baby, explained to him things that seemed obvious to her. Max, how can you not understand? I can't leave here. Can't. Imagine Alyosha waking up. It was easier for her to believe that her son was asleep, rather than teetering somewhere on the brink of life and death. And I wasn't there. Who will he call first? Me, Max, me. Mom. But I'm not around. Do you want him to be scared? That's enough for him already. Her muddled explanations couldn't convince Maxim, but there was nothing he could do. He came to the rehabilitation center every day, brought everything Lena asked for, sat next to her next to Alyosha, but at night, at her request, he invariably went home. Having taken a vacation from work, like his wife, he went to the traffic police in the morning or tried to call the body of inquiry. Even once he waited half a day outside the office of this notorious body, but to no avail. None of the people he needed showed up there. No, other employees showed up, and sometimes stayed there for a long time, but they had nothing to do with the case of hitting a pedestrian crossing on Sovetskaya Street. Max managed to find out that the case of a hit-and-run on his son is being handled by Captain Vasnetsov, who somehow miraculously constantly eludes or hides from him. Other employees began to respond to his claims with irritation that the captain was working on his case. But it was hard to believe. It was easier. I couldn't believe it at all. During all this time, Lena never asked about the affairs that were going on outside this ward. She did not ask about the health of her mother, with whom Maxim periodically called, and whom her daughter forbade to come to the hospital so as not to see her grief and tears. She was not interested in her husband's affairs, the situation at home, and certainly did not specify how the investigation of the crime that brought her son to the hospital bed was going. Nevertheless, one evening before leaving home as usual, Maxim decided to share his problems with Lena, why he couldn't meet with Captain Vasnetsov, and why it was still not clear who was responsible for the accident. It was difficult to see the prosecutor's investigator in this tired woman, and she seemed to be listening with half an ear. But when Max finished telling about his empty adventures, she turned to him anyway, and a clearly readable thought appeared in her eyes. Max, she began slowly, not letting go of Alyosha's hand. I think this case is being delayed on purpose. Why? They are trying to cover up the culprit of the accident, and this is some kind of significant person. I just don't see any other reason, even if the car is allegedly stolen. It's one thing if a pedestrian was hit at night, somewhere outside the city, where no one saw it. Then, yes, the search may take a long time, or the culprit may not be found at all. It's quite another thing when it happens in the middle of a city, where surveillance cameras are at every intersection, on a bright day, when there are dozens of witnesses around. The second point. Lena came to life before my eyes, and it turns out that the investigator hadn't disappeared anywhere. He was just busy with other things. Mom said that during the interview, the traffic cops took our coordinates, including our phones. Therefore, they know perfectly well where I work, and yet they remain silent. So the situation here is not at all simple and serious forces are involved. It would not have been difficult to call to give at least a crumb of information if they had wanted to, or could. But they can't because they've been forbidden to do it. So, it turns out, it was clear who Lena meant by the word they. All those dark forces that are trying to stall for time and slow down the whole thing. So far, only traffic cops have been seen here. It was easier to call traffic police representatives that way. Max. Lena bent over Alyosha again, and with inexpressible tenderness ran her hand through her son's hair. I won't be able to do this case yet. I should be here. Then she looked at her husband. You will do this, because evil must be punished. Don't be surprised. You can do it. I could go to the boss, but I won't. On the one hand, I don't want to set him up. On the other, I don't want to be disappointed, because it's still unknown what kind of forces are behind all this. It's not the first time we've been together. She looked at her husband with a sad smile. Do you remember how we promoted the case of the glowing dead and sent Princess Ilseonora home with the children? They both seemed to freeze for a second, then simultaneously looked at the lying Alyosha and averted their eyes in different directions. Both Maxim and Lena were thinking the same thing, but Maxim was the first to talk about it. If Pavel Ivanovich were here with his medical capsule, Alyosha would already be healthy. Max, don't. His wife tried to stop him with pain in her voice. You know it's all pointless. She paused for a moment and added bitterly. It's easier to turn to God. Prayer will reach him faster. And then she added, "Do you think I didn't ask for Alyosha? I ask for him every day." Max suddenly became bitter. "Lena, why don't you? Do you remember? This AI said that you have good mental abilities and you know how to mentally communicate. Try contacting him or directly contacting the princess. You saved her too." Max. His wife tried to reason with him. "Calm down. We don't even know which galaxy this Terran Empire is in, or where this planet is, Celia. Which way should I turn? And what's the use? Wait 500 light years or maybe more? And I can't wait for anything, because we don't know at what distance my mind link works." Here at the site, everything was within half a kilometer, or even less. Maxim, despite quite weighty arguments, stood his ground. "Lena, we must take every chance. You know, anyone. Even such a ghostly one. By and large, we don't know anything about the Terranians, except that they run time and space like we run a car. Besides, we're not losing anything." Elena promised more to calm her husband, who bit the bit. "Okay, Max, I'll try. And I'll try to figure out this long-running hit-and-run story," he said, pleased with at least a shadow of hope. "You should first try to install cameras from which the crossing should be visible," Lena instructed him. "And just ask if the traffic cops took the recordings for themselves or not. They won't show them to you, of course, but try to be convincing." She smiled a little for the first time. "Just don't hurt anyone." "That's how it goes," Maxim joked. Maxim was never a leader or an idea generator by nature, but he was a good performer. Max solved any task, especially if it was set correctly, as quickly, efficiently, and in due volume as possible, as far as circumstances allowed, without any sloppiness and gaffing. Well, as you know, insurmountable circumstances are extremely rare, especially when you have such a powerful tool of persuasion as a measure of protection. Maxim had hardly used his anti-medical abilities in the last year, but he was convinced that they had not gone away. Therefore, I went in search of the culprit of the accident calm and confident. If necessary, he will not hesitate and be tormented by doubts. He will take full advantage of them. The newly minted detective decided to start his own investigation from the very intersection near which everything happened. He used this passage every day, so he had an idea where the surveillance cameras might be located. And my first visit was to a branch of a large Moscow bank located in a corner house at an intersection next to the ill-fated pedestrian crossing. Already on the way, Maxim examined an outdoor video camera, the peephole of which was directed to the street and directly to the place that Max was most interested in. A high porch with a railing, massive doors, a waiting area with upholstered sofas, a spacious operating room with windows separated by decorative partitions, an information desk at the entrance, a scoreboard on the wall with a list of guest numbers and, of course, a security guard. It was as he had expected. An elderly, rather sturdy guard in a blue shirt with a black tie and a walkie-talkie in his hand met Maxim almost at the entrance. He looked at him carefully and looked away, apparently deciding that the incoming client posed no threat. Max went straight to him, greeted him kindly, and asked where he could find the head of the bank's security. The guard with the badge on his chest looked at the unusual visitor more attentively, as if appraisingly, paused, and answered the question with a question. "And for what purpose do you need him?" Maxim decided to be extremely frank, hoping for reciprocity and understanding. "A child was hit by a car here at the crossing on Friday. This is my son. He is currently in the Miners Rehabilitation Center, still in a coma, and there is not a word or half a word from the traffic cops about the culprit. It feels like they're not looking for him at all, and your camera is just looking at the transition. So I decided to just clarify whether they were interested in the recordings from the cameras or not." The guard looked at him with sympathy. "I wasn't on duty on Friday, but I heard about it. Wait a bit, I'll clarify." He hesitated for a second. "Can I just see your documents?" Maxim was ready for such a turn of events, so without hesitation he took out his passport, which he had seized from home. The security officer carefully scanned the passport data, looked at the registration page, returned the passport to the owner, and disappeared behind an inconspicuous door with the inscription, "Office Space," located behind a ledge of the wall next to the information room, after knocking on it. A minute later, he appeared, accompanied by a man dressed not in a security guard's uniform, but in an ordinary suit with a matching tie. It is clear that his shirt was white. The man, who greeted each other and introduced himself as the head of security, looked at Max no less attentively and apparently made some kind of decision for himself. "I was briefly told about your problem. Let's go outside and have a chat so as not to bother anyone here," and headed for the exit. The porch with a high, shiny railing from the front door went off to the side along the facade of the building for about 3 meters, forming a kind of open but fenced corner, where there was a small urn, ashtray on a high chrome leg. It was to her that Max's interlocutor went. Even from here, it was easy to see a pedestrian crossing with a constantly flashing traffic light. Maxim had to repeat his short story one more time, and he repeated it almost word for word. After listening, the head of the guards did not react at first, remained silent, then took a cigarette out of a pack, sniffed it, and simply turned it in his hand, as if deciding whether to smoke or not. Then he looked up and, looking at the intersection, said, "I recently quit smoking. Sometimes I come out here." He raised the cigarette to his face again. "I sniff." After a short pause, he continued, "I saw that accident, just from here. I called an ambulance too, and I watered this kid's grandmother down while she was waiting for the police." Maxim looked confused. "This is the mother-in-law. She was on her way to meet Alyosha from school." Then he pulled himself together, remembering why he had come. And what a car it was. Well, which one did? The black Audi was clearly flying more than 60. "I didn't even slow down, bitch," he said angrily, referring to the driver, and broke the cigarette. Then he stared at it, as if he didn't understand why he was holding the pieces in his hand, and threw them into a shiny ashtray. Maxim decided to go back to the beginning. "Did the traffic cops watch the recordings from your camera?" The head of security said something distantly, as if with condemnation. "We looked back on Friday. We even copied it to a USB flash drive." Maxim didn't want to apply his measure of protection to this normal, adequate, obviously sympathetic man. And he, like anyone else in such a situation, would have asked, "I understand that this probably shouldn't be done, but can I watch this recording as an exception? Since the police aren't looking, maybe I'll find this car myself." The man rested his hands on the railing, and without looking at Max, he suddenly declared, "Now it's impossible." And after looking at the perplexed Max, he continued, "The traffic cops seized the recording disc for that day. They showed up on Monday morning with a decree, and took it away. However, others came, not the ones on Friday. Or rather one, Captain." Maxim was taken aback. "How come? The police have all the data in their hands, but there is no result? Or can't they find it? Although the owner has certainly been identified. Why are they silent then?" The thought that suddenly flashed through his mind seemed very reasonable. His sympathetic counterpart had clearly seen this recording. "Tell me, have you seen this recording?" He froze, waiting for an answer. "Yes, I saw it, and not once," was the emotionless reply. "And the number?" Max's mouth suddenly went dry. "Did you look at the number by any chance? Maybe you remembered." "What is it?" he asked hopefully. "This won't go any further than me. I promise." The other man, apparently calmed down, took out a new cigarette. "There's nothing to remember. 3 sevens, about the 777. 42nd region. And as for, I have nothing to be afraid of. I'm a combat officer. In the past," he added sadly. "And I didn't give any subscriptions to the police." Maxim was elated in his heart. Now he would have something to go to the head of the traffic police. Most likely his fleeting joy was reflected on his face, but the head of security brought him back to earth, for some reason switching to you. "It's going to be hard for you." He paused until he saw Maxim looking at him in disbelief. "This is the car of our mayor's son. Most likely he was driving. When the traffic cops viewed the recording for the first time, they talked among themselves, and immediately stated that it was the car of Denis Karpov, the mayor's son. Apparently we've met more than once. One of them actually gloated, something like, 'Finished playing the horseradish on the violin. He's probably already in their livers.' and another added, "As if I hadn't gone to Novosibirsk." "Okay. Good luck." And, saying goodbye, he held out his hand. Yes, now Maxim had the trump cards in his hands. Even if they weren't the biggest ones, he hadn't seen the video from the bank's camera. But still. In addition, he did not plan to disclose the source of his information, and therefore its slaughter rate decreased somewhat. It would be good to meet with Captain Vasnetsov first and see his reaction. I wonder what he will say about the difficulties of the search. He won't say anything. Most likely he won't be there again. "You're still working, great emperor, like a bee." Max remembered the immortal phrase from his favorite comedy, and immediately thought with dislike, "I'm a hard worker." He recently spied this term as an imitation of bustling activity in an article about office workers, but it seemed to be appropriate here. Well, then I'll have to go to the boss. The city traffic police department was located just outside the city, and that's right, because it was not realistic to find a place for several dozen or even hundreds of cars in the center. On the outskirts, several brick houses stood surrounded by a wall of sturdy concrete slabs, and next to them, on a playground the size of a football field, concerned motorists left their iron horses while they solved their problems at the inspection. All the problems were solved in a large 3-story brick building, which could be accessed directly from the parking lot through a small gate, through which drivers streamed in a continuous stream from early morning until late evening. Passing exams, obtaining and exchanging rights, deregistration and registration of cars, accident investigations, search for stolen and missing cars, and many other issues were solved here. Therefore, there were always more than enough people on all 3 floors. But the chief's office was located in a small 2-story house with a tricolor over the entrance at the opposite end of the walled courtyard. It was quiet here. There was no such fuss as Max saw while he was looking for the boss's office. It seems that a few years ago, when he got his license and registered the car he bought, there was no such fuss. However, there was a security guard in the uniform of a police sergeant in the small lobby, who lazily inquired about the purpose of the visit. Without specifying if he had an appointment, he silently copied Max's passport details into a thick barn book, where, as he managed to notice, he was listed as only the 5th or 6th for today. In the reception area, a young girl with a pleasant face and shoulder-length blonde hair sat at a high semicircular table, who looked at the uninvited visitor in surprise. "What is your question?" Without responding to Max's greeting, she asked, and he immediately realized that he was talking to her on the phone. "I need to talk to your boss, Nikolai Sergeyevich Nezhnov," Maxim replied, reading the name of the head of the department beautifully written on the bronze plaque on the office door. "Today is an unacceptable day," the secretary said unkindly. "Or did you agree?" With some hope, she clarified a little more gently. "Unfortunately, I don't have time to wait 2 weeks for an appointment. It's urgent." Max went on the attack. "I have a complaint. Or do you also receive complaints by appointment?" "What is it?" he asked sarcastically. The secretary was a little confused, weighed something, then pressed the speakerphone button on the intercom. "Nikolai Sergeyevich," she began neutrally, hearing the boss's voice. "You have a visitor. He hasn't made an appointment. He says it's urgent." She paused and added, "With a complaint." "Let him come in," Nikolai Sergeyevich replied with displeasure, which even the visitor felt this displeasure. Strangely enough, Max was only pleased, and turned on. Let him get angry. Let him. The office of the head of the city traffic police department was standard, which Maxim was used to in police series, except a little more spacious. 2 T-shaped tables, one shorter for the boss, the other slightly longer for subordinates and visitors, quite decent chairs, a computer monitor on the table, a portrait of the president on the wall, a safe in the corner, and shelves with folders and books. The boss himself is sitting in a padded half-chair under the portrait. A youngish, trim man in a colonel's uniform with intelligent eyes, but with a worried look that an uninvited visitor should guess that he is not here at the right time. The colonel's uniform suited him and even emphasized his importance. After briefly responding to Maxim's greeting, Nikolai Sergeyevich made an inviting gesture with his hand, pointing to a chair that had been pushed back in advance, standing neither far nor close to him. It looks like a well-practiced tactic. "I'm listening to you. What is your problem?" he asked in a well-modulated voice. Maxim decided to end everything as quickly as possible, remembering that he still had to go to the rehabilitation center and laid it out in one go. On Friday, a car hit my son at a pedestrian crossing on Savetskia Street. He is currently in the rehabilitation center, still in a coma, and I still cannot meet with Captain Vasnetsov, who is leading this case, to clarify how the investigation is progressing and whether the culprit of the hit and run has been identified. And he immediately recovered, or rather, the crime. I would like to clarify this situation. Why does the captain not want to meet with me, and how is the investigation progressing? An elusive shadow passed over the head of the department's face, as if the questions were unpleasant to him. Folding his hands in front of him on the table, he was silent for a minute, then replied, "I know this business. I even have it under control." He paused a little longer, and adding compassion to his voice, continued, "Of course, this is an extraordinary case. It hasn't happened for a long time. But you are wrong to think that Captain Vasnetsov, who is leading the case, is hiding from you. Believe me, it works. He works, as they say, not out of fear, but out of conscience. We've identified the car that hit your son." "And who's the owner?" "Is he under arrest?" asked Max impatiently. The colonel winced, as if he had a toothache, but he didn't want to give the owner's name. He continued, choosing his words carefully, and Maxim immediately sensed it. "We have established the name of the owner, but it's not that simple." Nikolai Sergeyevich looked at Max carefully. "The fact is that the car is listed as stolen." Maxim's face showed nothing, except for an involuntary frown. Lena was talking about something similar. Whether it's true or not is the question. Could it be that the owner specifically wrote a statement about the theft in order not to be responsible for the crime? "I don't think so," the colonel said thoughtfully. "The statement was written on Friday morning, and the hit and run was sometime after lunch. I've been checking. Now we need to find a car. If we find her, we'll find the hijacker who hit your son." "We are working on this together with the criminal police. They raised all their informants, gave them directions around the region, to car dealerships, workshops, and car disassemblers. In general, the work is underway." Maxim left Colonel Nezhnov's office feeling upset. On the one hand, the head of the city department told him everything, without hiding anything. On the other hand, Max was still confused by this theft statement, written 2 hours before the hit and run. Why then did the traffic cops who watched the footage from the camera in the bank on Friday not know anything about this statement and were clearly talking about the owner of the car, Denis Karpov? There are no such coincidences. Or does it happen? And the inspectors really didn't know about the statement, otherwise they would have been talking about the hijacker, not the owner. Theoretically, yes, it is possible, but it is better to double-check. After checking in with the guard at the exit, Maxim went to the duty station located opposite in a 3-story building, where he had recently visited. Through a small window right next to the entrance, above which was written Duty Station, Maxim looked at the police captain, to whom he decided to turn. He did not have a clear plan, as well as pre-formulated questions due to lack of time. He relied solely on improvisation. After saying hello, he began to fantasize. "Tell me, is it you who registers statements about the theft of vehicles?" After receiving an affirmative answer, he continued. "My neighbor's car was stolen on Friday. I just found out about it today. By chance, another neighbor told me. I'm calling Denis, but I can't get through. He must have gone to Novosibirsk." He looked innocently at the policeman, and, demonstrating his awareness so that he would not have any suspicions of greed, added, "He studies there. I think I saw the hijacker. Maybe this will somehow help in the search." The attendant disappeared from Max's field of vision for a second, then reappeared with a thick magazine in his hands. "What's the owner's last name?" "What is it?" he asked. "Karpov Denis Viktorovich." He already knew the name of the mayor of the city. "Black Audi, 0777 AE, Region 42. He confirmed his awareness. The inspector flipped through several pages of the incident report book, apparently found the necessary entry. "Yes, indeed, such a statement was registered on Friday. But you need to contact Captain Vasnetsov at the body of inquiry in the 7th office. He's in charge of this case. By the way, he accepted the application at 9:30. He was on duty on Friday, and unknowingly, the attendant helped the improviser a lot. Maxim had already looked into this office and knew that there was no Captain Vasnetsov there. but he had to play according to the captain's script outside the window. Max went to the 7th office, which fortunately was not visible from the desk, stood there for a couple of minutes, and returned. "Sorry, the captain is not there. Sorry. Otherwise, I'm flying to Turkey with my wife tomorrow. Maybe I think I need to make a sketch or something." He made a mournful face. "Well, okay. I think Denise, with his connections, will find his car anyway. I'll go then." Max's calculation was justified. The duty inspector didn't think for long, took out his phone. "Wait a minute. I'll get in touch with him now. I'll tell you what and how. Let him decide for himself." Maxim did not hear the conversation itself. The narrow window and the fact that the captain turned his back on the visitor while talking did not allow Max to grasp the essence of the conversation. After a minute, the attendant turned to the volunteer assistant. "Unfortunately, the captain is busy with work right now. He'll be around 7 in the evening. Won't you be able to get there by then?" the captain asked hopefully. Estimating that he would have time to visit the miners' rehabilitation center before 7 and return, Maxim promised to drive up.